Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Saturday's episode of Interviews with Dean Mel. I am Dean Mel Santa Maria. Tonight we have a very special guest. Cases have been filed against her. She is not retreating. She is confronting all these cases. The woman in the middle of the storm, so to speak. The woman of the hour. She graduated cum laude from Princeton University in 1986. And also she worked at CNN, and I should say she's now a very veteran journalist, transferred to ABS-CBN, and then you have Rappler. She wrote books, and not only that, she taught for a while in her alma mater, Princeton, and also at the University of the Philippines. Without further ado, let us welcome Miss Maria Ressa. Good evening, Maria.
Good evening, Dean Mel. Thank you for having me.
How are you, Maria? How are you right now? Are you okay?
Literally in the middle of a storm, but I'm good. I'm good. It's like I think the hardest part is anger management. Because we're seeing things that shouldn't be happening, and what do? You certainly can't rail against the skies, so you just put down your head and keep working.
And last week was very busy for you, both probably in Rappler and outside Rappler. Some extracurricular activities somewhere there in Manila.
Yeah, it's been, I think, almost every week I have to show up in court. June 15th, I was convicted along with Ray Santos for cyber libel, a retroactive application of the law. And then last week, I was arraigned on the 5th tax evasion charge on July 22. And then next week, I think we have 2 court dates. We have a second Keng case that is at the Makati prosecutor's office. That's on the 30th, and then on the 29th, there's another tax evasion case, this time at the Court of Tax Appeals. So, but of course, in the process of all of this, we're still rolling out a new tech platform for Rappler. We're doing our job, so I probably spend 80%, depending on what week it is. There have been weeks last week when I would be in court 4 times in the week. Gosh. So, yeah, it's annoying as heck, but I also keep thinking, good God, this is a lot of money being spent to harass me and Rappler and other journalists. Maybe they're afraid we're doing a story we shouldn't be doing, and so it makes me want to do more investigative stories, because what are we not doing? What are we so afraid of?
You know what, Maria? The statement of the open letter in defense of press freedom by Princeton alumni and alumnae says it all. No, it says the phoniness of the charges is underscored by the absurd number of them. How many cases are you facing right now?
In 2018, they started out with 11 cases and investigations, and then slowly that got whittled. I have 8 criminal charges in 2019, and that means 8 arrest warrants. And, the things have changed, but there's a new case. So one case has been consolidated. This is the something they call violating the anti-dummy laws. 2 cases have been consolidated into one, and then Mr. Keng filed another one that is still at the Makati prosecutor's office. So, look, I've seen other countries where there's a heck of a lot more, and it could get worse. I'm hoping it gets better, but I also feel like, thank you for mentioning that letter, because it was a wonderful surprise. George Schultz. It was so well written. I was so oh my God, I should have thought about writing it this way, diba? But
yes,
it was. I saw a lot of classmates, and it reminded me how we are connected globally, and it reminded me more than anything also how, regardless of how Filipino Americans are being demonized right now, Gabby Lopez's dual citizenship, my dual citizenship, these are the ties that bind. So anyway, I'll shut up and follow you.
Well, that's okay. We'll go back to that later. But The kind of fortitude you have, the kind of patience, the kind of endurance you have in going through all these trials, no, must have started somewhere, Maria. So the first thing I'd like to ask you is, what started you off as a journalist? What this very, very as I call it, a very dangerous profession for anyone. What started you off as a journalist? What were the defining moments? What were the pivotal points of your life that when you said, I want to be this one. I want to be somebody who brings the news to people. What are they?
I fell into journalism. I mean, I was a good Asian American. I was a good Pinoy American in the States, and my parents wanted me to be a doctor. So I applied to all the 6-year med programs. And then I realized once I got into school, I didn't like it. I don't like the sight of blood. And so then my parents said, be a lawyer. Mel, be a lawyer, right?
Okay.
So I did all the pre-law stuff. And then I realized I wanted to understand how people worked. Psychology, sociology, English literature, comparative literature. And then my senior thesis, every Princetonian has to have a thesis. My senior thesis, I went from doing Drosophila research, genetic research with fruit flies when I was a freshman, to writing a play my senior year that was brought to the Fringe Festival in Scotland by Princeton. It was a combination of understanding what happened in the Philippines, kind of taking a Brechtian approach to it, and then framing it in a personal story, a battle for a child. So that was my senior thesis. Anyway,
Okay.
how did I fall? I fell into it because I wanted to find out where home was. And in 1986, People Power happened. And
right.
I was here on a Fulbright the other way because I couldn't have afforded coming. We weren't well off. I had 3 jobs to get through school. And when I got here, I realized, I've never felt more American than when I'm with Filipinos, and never felt more Filipino than when I'm with Americans. So when I got here, I realized I wanted to learn to understand, and the best way to do it was to I walked into the government station then. It was PTV4, it had just
Right.
transitioned, and I Twink Makaraig, who has just died of cancer this year, she was an anchor, and I walked in and I said, I know how to direct, and they let me direct the newscast. I mean, so I started
Immediately.
learning,
Yes.
and I guess that was part of what was so fascinating about 1986. It was a time, I had a big question in 1986, which was, how did Marcos stay in power for 21 years? Right? And I always used to get in bad debates with my friends then, because I would say, there had to have been, Filipinos must have kept him, right? Who was complicit? Of course, these are questions we don't really answer as a society. And now in my 50s, I understand completely how a dictatorship grows, how a democracy can cave from within, and how weak institutions collapse.
So it was
Anyway, sorry, long
it,
answer.
it was from the very start you were just placed in a political situation, which means you could have gone to any other areas of news or on human interest news, but it was politics. It was politics from the very beginning, Maria.
It was this country's movement to democracy. And then I think I would say one person really pushed me into journalism, and it was Cheche Lazaro.
Right.
Because after I was working for Channel 4, when the Fulbright ended, I started working. Cheche hired me for the new ABS-CBN. That's the irony, right? When
Right.
ABS-CBN opened, Cheche was head of news, the current affairs group, and she asked me to join her. We began Probe. So it was Cheche, Lucy Cruz Valdez, and myself. And then when my Fulbright ended, Cheche just said, stay here. And I went back to the United States, bought the equipment for a new company, and that's how we set up Probe. So that was my startup when I was in my 20s.
Okay, Probe was a very good show. I know Cheche Lazaro and Lucy Cruz Valdez. It was a very prominent, a leading show about current events and human interest and politics and going to the United States after PTB4 to CNN. How did that come about?
I was in the Philippines, and CNN actually, they wanted a reporter. They wanted someone to start reporting. So this was like the end of '86, and I knew a person. We had common friends, and it was a reporter named Gary Stryker who came, and I recommended Cheche because I was her director at that point. I was a producer and director, and Cheche, they talked, but for whatever reason, I think 'cause I was cheap, CNN came and offered me a job, and I'd never been on camera. I'd never been a reporter. I was learning. I was, 21, 20, I was very young, and I was like a sponge soaking up what the Philippines meant. That was really the journey I was on. I wanted to find home. And then by '87, they asked me to set up the Manila Bureau. I did that up until 1995 when 94, my boss at CNN said, I think you should go set up a Jakarta Bureau. And it kind of made sense because the Philippines is about 100 million people, but Jakarta, Indonesia, is the world's largest Muslim population. I was growing as a reporter. I was an Asian American. Others had tried to set up a Jakarta bureau, and they found it difficult under Suharto. It took me a few months, 8 months, to negotiate with the government to set up the bureau. This is part of the reason these cases are laughable to me, because I have done this before. I've set up bureaus. We know what taxes mean. We know, what legal papers you need to put in mind. So I set up the Jakarta Bureau in 1995, and then I lived through history, the end of a 32-year rule of Suharto. I think from 1986 until the time I left CNN, which was the end of 2004, I covered the transition to democracy of the major Southeast Asian countries. And that was really incredible.
And which one? And which country would you say was the highlight of that experience?
The Philippines is home. So this is always something different. This is where I learned to be a reporter, and it was also harder to report from here, right? But I think Indonesia is just incredible because in a way, Indonesia, it started ASEAN. It had a role in the world stage that the Philippines didn't really have at that point in time. So I learned a ton. Plus, I learned Islam, which is huge, right? And then all of the 9/11 reporting that I did came from piecing together the Al-Qaeda network in Southeast Asia. It's called Jamaah Islamiyah. That was from Jakarta. But there were so many things, I always felt so privileged being a reporter, being a journalist, because, my God, somebody's paying you to go ask questions, to figure out what's going on, right?
Yes.
And I think the most interesting thing for me was understanding that leaders, their strengths and their weaknesses are embedded into whatever organization they lead, whether it's a club, a sports team, a news organization, or a country. So I was fascinated by leadership and how principles and and then when I came home to ABS-CBN, principles, profit, and then when I set up Rappler and I'm running the business, where do you draw that line, right? So lots of things. I mean, it was an incredible time period.
So what started Rappler?
So what brought me home was Gabby Lopez. In 2000, he tried to get me to come home and head ABS-CBN News. At that point, I said no, and I'm glad I did because 9/11 happened after, right? So that began a whole new shift in career. But he asked me again at the end of 2003, and we negotiated in 2004, and I decided to leave. Leaving CNN was one of the hardest things because I grew up with CNN, right? I was the face of CNN for 18 years, and I wasn't sure what my identity was outside of being a reporter, because you know what we're like when we throw ourselves into our jobs.
Yes.
Anyway, so when I came home, it was a really, really rude awakening, because Filipinos don't really say what they mean, although it feels like they do, right? We say
Yes.
the same words, but
Yeah.
at the beginning in ABS, I always used to say, gosh, please tell me, be blunt, be honest. And, there was smooth interpersonal relations. But I think you can change culture. So why did we start Rappler? Precisely because I felt technology was a game changer that traditional news groups weren't tapping. Because we always put our youngest and our third string into digital. Instead of taking, the moneymaker for our traditional news groups is our primetime newscast, and that's where we put our best people. But digital needed thinking, real thinking, innovative thinking. And so we started Rappler because I've never liked playing power politics. Leading ABS-CBN News meant there was some of that, but that's where I pretend to be very American. I don't really have ties here, in the sense that I didn't grow up here, and that's good. That's actually great as a reporter, as a journalist, because you can say what you see. You can report it the way you see it.
Now let's go to Rappler. Now Rappler really revolutionized internet portal in terms of news in the Philippines, because there were some groups which tried to imitate but really didn't get far, and Rappler just stayed, and Rappler became sort of a fiscalizer, and as you said, you were in on politics, and mostly that was the strength. That was the strength to be critical and to focus on government. And were you surprised, Maria, that you've ended up this way? Meaning to say, with a lot of cases and a lot of troubles, were you surprised? Or in a way, did you expect it from this new government?
Ironically, Gabby told me this would happen, but was I surprised? Look, by the time the Duterte administration came into office, I was in my mid-50s, right? So, or early to mid-50s, and I feel like I've spent my career going to the gym. I know who I am. I know why I do what I do. I helped write the standards and ethics manual for ABS-CBN. We created Rappler from scratch. And these decisions are very easy to make, right? So when someone tries to intimidate you, it's kind of just shocking. And to the credit of the government, of the Duterte administration, they've never actually tried to negotiate with me directly. I think, like with other news groups, it's the business that they try to impact, and the cases are first filed on the business. They had a difficult time with me because I run the business, but I'm a journalist, and I run it in the same way journalists would run an organization, right? So we're not easily intimidated. That my other co-founders, Glenda Gloria, Chai Hofelenia, Beth Frondoso, these women have stood up for the right things because we're journalists, and our job is to protect the public sphere. And I think what Rappler has proven is the good values, that the mission of journalism, needed in our society more today than ever, is good business. Because despite all of the government attacks, I'm a good planner, and ABS-CBN taught me how to run a large organization. When we began Rappler, I had a plan that we would hit net even, like we would make money in our 5th year. And we were on track. We were creating new platforms, we were integrating technology, and we were shifting the form of journalism. In 2016, our first month of net income, of positive income, was April 2016. And then Mr. Duterte was elected in May. And then, of course, the weaponization of social media began, right? Yes. And so that meant all of our plans, 2017, 2018, 2019, let me tell you how social media was weaponized and how that has changed reality. And it's really simple. It's in the idea that journalists equals criminals. In 2016, Mr. Duterte, when he was mayor, used social media to help him win. I think that happened pretty fairly, but they learned how to use social media very well, and the weaponization of social media happened after he won, after the drug war began. If you look at the hours, soon after Mr. Duterte took his oath of office, the first death happened within 4 hours of that, right? And so anyone who questioned the deaths in the drug war, and in those months from July to December, you're talking about 33 deaths per day, right? That's the numbers now that have been crunched. So in 2016, when the drug war began, weaponization of social media, inciting hate, attacking news organizations, attacking journalists. And that was when the idea of journalist equals criminal was downloaded into our Facebook information ecosystem. When they tried to use it against me, I laughed because I figured, I have a long track record that'll be funny. But then when you lie a million times, when you say it a million times, people begin to believe it. In 2017, President Duterte attacked Rappler, saying the same thing top down. Journalist equals criminal. In 2018, the government filed 11 cases and investigations. In 2019, they arrested me twice in a 5-week period and filed 8 arrest warrants against me. In order to be free, I had to post bail 8 times. And then 2020, June 15th, they convicted me and Ray Santos. So journalist equals criminal. This is how death by 1,000 cuts happens to our democracy. It happens in plain sight. It is with the use of social media and the use of power and the weaponization of the law.
Maria, my question now is, why do people all over the world, as they are watching us right now, why do we have to pay special attention to you, to your situation, to the cases that are filed against you? Why do we have to do that?
Because they're ludicrous. Because they're clearly meant to harass, to intimidate, and like I told you, I think I've just been a journalist for too long. I don't really get intimidated by power because our job is to hold power to account. Actually, Mel, I worry about lawyers. How are lawyers doing their jobs? How are you teaching law students when they are seeing the law just to file these cases against me? The legal acrobatics that happened are unbelievable to me. And I think we're at this point where the law has been bent so much that it's broken. It's been weaponized against its perceived opponents. So why should the rest of the world care? Because let's start with technology in the Philippines. For the 5th year in a row, Filipinos spend the most time on social media globally. And then in terms of our descent from a very robust democracy to I think, with Mr. Duterte, with President Duterte being so powerful, he is the most powerful leader our nation has ever had. He actually boasted after after the shutdown of ABS-CBN, after a captured legislature voted against the franchise of ABS-CBN, Mr. Duterte said, he's really proud that he was able to hit the oligarchs, a refrain from 1970s, without declaring martial law. So he is powerful. So we're almost like I would say we're a dictatorship pretending to be a democracy with rule of law.
And on the personal level, it takes so much on you. You get tired. You go to these cases. But on a professional level, the weaponizing of the law. But on an institutional level, how do you assess our institution right now? Is it going down with all? You're just a microcosm of what's happening on a bigger, larger scale. You're like that. But when it comes to ABS-CBN, it's just that monstrous event that almost, changed the paradigm of TV viewers almost overnight.
That is huge. And this is where I feel like this idea of normalizing this is really bad. We should be acting like an atom bomb went off. The fact that a small working group in the House of Representatives could shut down the top broadcaster in the country. And to pretend that this is not a free press, a freedom of speech issue, that it isn't a freedom of the press issue, I think we have to kind of wake up and call a spade a spade. Look, I think we live in an environment, I've been calling this the 3 C's: corrupt, coerce, co-opt. And if you don't do any of these, you become targeted, right? Laila de Lima became targeted, and she's been in prison since February 2017. I'm targeted, as is Rappler, as is ABS-CBN, right? So actually, if you look at all of this, if we just pull up and look at the actions, how can we not be panicking about the loss of our democracy? This is it. In the next few months, I think we will see whether or not, one, will we have elections? Two, will we have a democracy? This is the time where I think every single Filipino needs to ask themselves, what are you willing to sacrifice for facts, for truth? Because this is what's under attack. Sorry, I'll shut up, Mel. I can talk about this forever, because I think what I get energy from is realizing that we are living through the times that I used to read about. I've gone back and I'm rereading all of the books from the 70s that are describing it. The same conditions, a collapsing economy. The Lopez's were actually, they were faced tax evasion charges. And in the 70s, the courts actually threw it out. Mm-hmm. You had a captured legislature. You had businesses. Oligarch was Marcos's phrase against the Lopez's. I mean, we're seeing a playbook. So I guess
what do you think? What do you think, Maria? What's the next target from your assessment of the whole situation?
Constitutional change. What we're seeing, and it has been empowered by COVID-19. You have an opportunistic government that has taken advantage of this time period when, frankly, it should be making sure we all survive this. And we're here to help the government, right? But instead of actually taking care of COVID-19, it's consolidated power. And now, just last weekend, these moves to try to change the Constitution are extremely alarming, because what we see are citizens and politicians talking about elections as if this is where there will be justice. Hello, we may not even get there. I guess, so if you think about it now, this is death by 1,000 cuts. I've been saying this for 4 years and I feel like Cassandra. It's, we have an administration that has largely appointed retired military generals to handle a public health crisis that has largely been characterized by security measures, right? And in this time period, ABS-CBN was shut down. I don't think that could have happened without COVID-19. We're also seeing, starting with the decision in cyber libel case, the codification into law of these kinds of random abuses of power that it had done in the last 4 years. So now every Filipino could be charged with cyber libel for up to 15 years after they posted anything. Because in order to convict me, they actually had to change the period of prescription. The anti-terror law. No,
yes,
you were the first. You were the first, right?
The anti-terror law.
You filed a case in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I filed that case. And what do you think? So, yeah, you had your moves to amend the Constitution, and as a prelude, there seems to be that very, very revealing move on the anti-terrorism law, where you get arrested by being merely suspected of doing something without even a benefit of a hearing, at least before the anti-terrorism law. And then you have this pandemic No, is the government in disarray? Who is in charge? Does that somehow get into your mind, Maria?
I look at the impact. I look at the effects because I think I don't like insider politics. Glenda and Chai and our other political reporters go into that, but I look at impact so I can try to see a bigger picture. And what we have seen are very blatant moves to consolidate power in the final 2 years of an administration that, President Duterte said this to me in our 2016 interview at the palace. He said he leads using violence and fear. I asked him, do you need to have fear? Do you want people to be afraid of you? He said, yes, absolutely. This is his style. I do think that the man wanted to do things, wanted to be good. But I will say that you talk to any villain, they're all the heroes of their stories, right? So what have we seen here? COVID-19, a lockdown, a pandemic lockdown that is now, we're entering our 19th week, and yet our incidents, the very basic parts of it, test, trace, treat, give aid, these things still leave a lot to be desired. I mean, people are saying they haven't gotten the second tranche, and yet what we've done very well is in curfews, in arrests, more than 61,000 arrested as of like 2 weeks ago. Instead of, I think this public health crisis could have given the government a chance to unite, to lead. And I guess that's the part that makes me crazy. But anyway, sorry, Mel. I mean, here's...
yeah. I'd like to know whether, do you think this government lacks the ability of starting a conversation with the people? No, if Maria, when you critique the government, you are met with those all the bad words in the dictionary and castigation. Is that the thing lacking with the government? The ability to truly start a conversation with the people. What do you think?
I think that this government is extremely good at communications. I'll say the disinformation networks that we have tracked. They can control us through Facebook, right? I mean, I've called Facebook a behavioral modification system. This government knows how to do that. They're very good at it. In some ways, the problem is that they're too good at it because they think governance is comms. They think governance is narrative, but in the end, governance is actually about actions in the real world. So I think, Mel, you're going to get me in so much trouble because it's so much fun to talk to you. So look, how about competent leadership, right? That's, I think, the first step. What are we facing? We've had a former health secretary who dealt with SARS, who's done this before. No real... Where do I begin? Why don't I just pull out? Because I don't want to be personal. Because I've never actually... I don't like going there. Here's the patterns that we're seeing. The first part was to control speech. That was the first move. 3 phases of what I would call the consolidation of power, right? So the first was control the narrative, and that was with social media, that was retaining control, putting a Damocles sword over every journalist who is reporting from the Philippines by making Rappler, ABS-CBN, and the Inquirer cautionary tales. This is what happens to you if you don't follow us. The second is, so there's a chilling effect. I joke all the time that we're beyond chilling. We're already in Siberia. The second are the laws, right? So the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, which released a ton of money. The government has 3 trillion pesos that has been released for COVID-19, and the anti-terror law. So that is control, right? with the anti-terror law, they could designate me, they could designate you, anyone. A small group of cabinet secretaries can name you a terrorist, and you can be arrested without a warrant and held for up to 24 days. The third is now the possibility of constitutional change. And it's actually, if you think about it, if you connect constitutional change to goods and services, to aid that hasn't yet reached the people, that becomes very easy to get the signatures that you would need for something like this. So look, I think I've spent the last 4 years thinking through worst case scenarios and trying to be prepared for them. I thought the 2019 elections, I thought our opposition politicians should have not treated it as midterm elections, because it wasn't. It was a consolidation of power. Anyway, sorry, Mel. Let me ask you a question.
No. I'll ask
How
you
were you
another one.
teaching?
Another one.
Sorry, go.
Maria, in just a span of 5 months, we've had your case, which really caught us by surprise, and then you have ABS-CBN, and then, as you said, you have the anti-terrorism law, and then you have the Constitution, and now you have the PhilHealth fiasco, corruption case, and it seems to be that, as soon as one event is just cooling off, you would come up with another event, and so forth and so on, and it seems that, you could already expect something is about to happen again. What do you think? Do you think this is a orchestrated? What do you think, Maria?
I think it's a combination of different things. I think that, we've seen, for example, and this is backed by data, when I talk about social media, I'm not pulling it out of thin air. I can tweet, I can share with you the stories that show you the way that they worked because of data. As we saw consolidation, the weaponization of social media, we saw disinformation networks tied to the government take over the center of the information ecosystem on Facebook in the Philippines, right? So people don't quite understand how they're being manipulated, and it's very effective. The first is that you put your own data into Facebook, right? And then machine learning and artificial intelligence pulls it out and then sells it at your most vulnerable moment. It sells your most vulnerable moment to a message, to a government or a company. That's the way micro-targeting and Facebook works. The government has used this extremely well, even though, as a journalist, I will tell you, they have consistently denied that they have, in quotes, troll armies, and they have come up with different definitions. How good are they at it? Let's take DDS. Within a few months of taking office, DDS, which used to stand for Davao Death Squad, now was turned into a positive and became Duterte diehard supporters. The color yellow, it got to a point that not even Bam Aquino wanted to use the color yellow because of the operations on social media, right? So this is very, very potent. I think the other part that we have to worry about is when that happens, how can we have a democracy when we're so manipulated that we can't make a choice? This is, to me, the most worrisome part. When you say, do we really have a choice? When you talk about statistical surveys, is it really true? It's hard to tell, because when I ask Pulse Asia or SWS, how do you factor in fear? How do you factor in violence? And like other statistical surveys around the world where dictatorships form, there's no real answer, but the performance of that in other countries actually parallel the rise of the dictator-to-be. So it's not like Trump, who has like a very, very low rating. Here in the Philippines, there's a bandwagon effect that the popularity of President Duterte, if you don't support President Duterte, Mel, you know this, you get pounded, you get attacked. That's never happened before. Why do we think that that's normal, right? Anyway, sorry, I'll shut up.
So do you
Please,
think,
your question.
at the very least, do you think, Maria, that this administration, in a sense, is successful in controlling the narrative? Meaning to
Absolutely.
say, controlling the narrative in the sense that so many problems are cropping up, and the patchwork is coming out, and people begin to be confused, and people begin to be mixed up in their head, and
Yeah.
there seems to be no focus at all. So in that sense, the narrative is to unfocus the people. So do you think
Yeah.
that's what's happening?
Yes, absolutely. So here's the big picture for this, right? And these are very tied to Russian disinformation tactics. You know, in when you pull it outside, the United States had this. They called it influence operations. The goal of influence operations is to change the way real people think and ultimately the way they act, right? So yes, the administration is very good at narratives. It's very good at attacking. Journalist equals criminal. It's very good at pounding to silence. The problem is that a virus can't just be demonized, right? Because that's the way populist leaders around the world actually work. This needs to be solved, and what we're seeing is a movement towards more draconian measures to do that. But the other thing that you said is, yes, the government is extremely good at it, enabled by Facebook. I think that's the other reason why I feel like in 2016 we were fighting impunity on two fronts: the Duterte administration's drug war and Silicon Valley's social media platforms that were enabling the rise of these attacks against journalists. I want to take it to where, you ask the question, remind me again the question that you asked about information and people, right? The impact on people.
I was saying, is this government good on narratives? No. Are they now in control of the narrative? Because even if the opposition is there, they seem to be, a little bit weak in coming up with a unified stand. And so that the charm of the President Duterte, is just up there in the survey, and he's using this to the max, and therefore, in a sense, controlling the narrative. And given the pandemic, the failures of the pandemic, it could switch into so many areas just to get people out of thinking of the pandemic. It's just a state of controlling the narrative in a confusing way.
Yeah. So here's what I would say with that, right? Number one, the machinery of the government is unbeatable. There is no, yes, there are some that have tried to form networks to fight back. It's impossible. News groups, for example, have not collaborated enough to be able to fight the facts. The second thing is the end goal of influence operations in the Russian sense is to make you doubt everything, right? So the first targets of attacks were the institutions. People you believed in, institutions you believe in. If you pound them so that they crack wide open and you make Filipinos distrust everything and everyone, the voice with the loudest megaphone, President Duterte, will always win. So this is a tactic. If you don't trust anyone, then you will want to follow President Duterte. That's also true, right? You ask, these are just informal conversations I've had when I talk to people. They don't want President. The narrative that has been fed to our mass base is that President Duterte is doing everything he can, and no leader around the world has been able to do this well. And so they feel like, again, it's a manipulative move. They feel like they want to help him, and they also don't want to change him because this is really, really hard, right? Because this is tough for anyone. Having said that, take a look at the way the PR machinery, right? And I'll point to a story we did last year on the SEA Games, when the government's inefficiencies were so apparent and reporters were just doing their jobs, reporting everything wrong with the SEA Games. And instead of actually addressing the problems of the SEA Games, what they did was to turn the machine against news organizations and tear down trust. So that's the first, tear down the trust in the news organizations. The second was to attack the individual reporters to make them doubt themselves. This is a tactic. But in the end, I really do believe that, look, the Duterte administration, where you go, we all go. We need to deal with COVID-19. So you're going to have to, at some point, change the way you're dealing with this and harness whole of society. Sorry.
So now you made a very, very, very revealing statement there when you said there is no collaboration enough among media, among media. So what do you think? Is that frustrating? Is that disappointing? You know, you have ABS-CBN being shut down. You have you being cases have been filed against you, and yet there is no strong or firm or vigorous protest from other media outlets. Do you think that's frustrating? Are you disappointed?
I'm learning from history. And this is part of the reason I've spent the last few days rereading all of the books about the 70s, right? Part of it is because of the environment we live in. And the news organizations that are businesses want to, and this isn't just news, every business operating in the country kind of ducks a little bit so that they don't become targeted, because the targeting is so painful when that happens to you, right? And there are real costs to standing up for principles. So what I'm hoping is that our administration actually leads and allows different voices to help. Having said that, how do we challenge impunity? Because this is what we have seen. How do we challenge using fear against us at a time when we've been locked down and fear of a virus is compounded, when the stresses on ordinary Filipinos have increased, when millions of Filipinos have lost their jobs? This is all a formula for greater control if you go back to history. This is what I've just read, right? The collapse of the economy consolidated power under the Marcos regime. The huge debt borrowings at that time period gave tremendous money to the Marcos government. And then, just to remind you, $5 to $10 billion of Filipino money was taken out by the Marcoses. That is how much our generation paid. So it's happening again. And I think that, you can see how conflicted I am. I think that the easiest way is for the government to actually lead the entire nation. That's easiest. The hard one is for us, for Filipinos, to draw the line, to realize that we're going to actually have to fight for our democracy. Not next year, not in elections, but right here, right now.
Do you sense, Maria, that it's already happening? I mean, this is the anti-terrorism case elevated to the Supreme Court it's becoming to be the most a case with the most petitioners filed in the history of our jurisprudence, and well, the clergy is another sector, and they are becoming so vocal now. So, do you think it's beginning?
So as I was so negative about COVID-19 and the consolidation of power, the opportunistic ways the Duterte administration dealt with it, I will also say that we have never seen #oust Duterte now trend, number one, not just in the Philippines, but around the world, right? So yes, it did start, and we saw it on social media on April 1, when President Duterte, in a late night he was rambling again, but he told the police, shoot them dead. And Filipinos, scared, waiting for food, were outraged, and they began to trend #oust Duterte now. The church, business communities, my conviction had all business communities in the Philippines coming out with a statement, right? I hope, and this is enlightened self-interest on the part of the Duterte administration, yes, you are getting pushback. It's still pushback that I would say is very Filipino, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, right? It's still very Filipino, but certainly it's building, right?
Yeah.
Harness us so that this doesn't begin to tear the country apart again.
2 more years to go, Maria Ressa, in this administrations. You think there's still at that gap, there's still that space for a miracle to happen, or adjustments to be done, so that uh, all damages that have been made will be remedied.
It's very, very hard to say that because I came in as a reporter in 1986 when the Philippine National Police was just coming out, right? It took a decade for the police to learn human rights again, right? To actually bring it back into the culture. The decay of our institutions, the decay of our values, God forbid, even the sexist statements of President Duterte that are, sexist at best and misogynist at worst, these will have an impact on the generation that is coming of age. What does that mean for our values? These aren't things we can even talk about because so many people will have no jobs. Our economy will crumble. And we hope that the State of the Nation address will give us a roadmap ahead, right? We need competent leadership that plans ahead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you think cabinet reshuffle at this time would give a positive impact to the administration? People are, for example, clamoring that so the Secretary of Health be ousted. No? So
Yeah.
the IATF seems to be according to Senator Drilon, you're such a failure, and we have this PhilHealth fiasco now coming in probably by next week, and you have the anti-terrorism law still mounting. People, and there are still people who will be filing, I guess, by next week, and
Yes.
so there you are. That's the milieu as of the moment. So what can you say
Yes.
about that?
Yes. I mean, let's not forget the Chinese companies that are coming in, Pogo, right? This is still an issue. Marawi, which was essentially still devastated, and Chinese investment driven rebuilding that hasn't really happened. A build program that has delivered significantly less, and yet is part of the administration's plan to recover for the future. There are many different ways to tackle this. We can't even get to a sophisticated discussion because of the disinformation, the influence operations that are happening on social media, because of the attacks on the press. So I guess the best case scenario I can see is that the Duterte administration asks for help. Yes, a cabinet reshuffle, but how will that happen when President Duterte's leadership style is to really give tremendous power to every cabinet secretary, right? I worry even about our reporters when they watch these meetings and there's this, it's obsequious. These are leaders in their own right. They should be leading and they should be challenging. So I worry about the pattern and the trends that we have. This the Duterte administration realizes. Hard to tell because it's all about deflection. Harry Roque, who we've known him for many years, right? It's like a tumbling game. It's not. This is really our lives on the line.
Now let's go to something international. How about the United States? The United States, they are beginning to look at the South China Sea, and they are realizing that we cannot let China alone. Otherwise, they'll probably gobble up everything there. So, do you think that at least the Duterte government must get a cue from this one and, pivot a little bit in favor of our longtime allies. What do you think about that, Maria?
I think you've seen it happen already, right? The ARIA, under the terms of ARIA, Senator De La Rosa's visa was denied. And as a quick response, the Duterte administration tried to said it would cancel the visiting forces agreement. Well, just recently, they reversed themselves precisely because if you look at the numbers, many of the things that China had said they would do have not happened. And not enough pump priming has happened in the economy. Our military is still largely, when we hear some of the officers talk about how they can't read Chinese in equipment that they would be given, or Russian, right, in ships. So it's still very much trained by the U.S. military. Mm-hmm. So we've seen this happen already. It's flipped. The United States has kind of stood there behind us, waiting to see where the Philippines will go. I will say that President Duterte in October 2016 went to Beijing, and then he surprised everybody, including the Department of Foreign Affairs, by announcing that the Philippines would pivot away from the United States to China and Russia. And now the Philippines is punching above its weight because of the South China Sea, what we call the West Philippine Sea. So where the Philippines goes, great geopolitical power plays happen. So this is also interesting. Secretary Locsin is interesting to see what he's doing, because he actually has helped maintain a firmer position against China. Right? So we'll see. I mean, hard to tell right now. But given a dispersed information ecosystem with all of these attacks in a very paternalistic decision-making process, the lack of transparency of data in COVID-19, right? Given all of this, we are we're so distracted, and yet the problems are clear, and there is a lot at risk for all of us.
Okay, let's go back to the thing nearer to your heart, the press, Maria. So your expectations of the press today. How is your assessment? What is your assessment?
I see reporters coming together, chafing at the bit, wanting to do the job, because the mission of journalism has never been as important as it is today. In Rappler, that's been a call. It's a challenge. We want to do investigative reporting. There is a lot to look at because so much data is being withheld from us. Other news organizations face their own internal battles. Right? If you are trying to avoid conflict, how do you do that? Where do you draw the lines? ABS-CBN has scared everybody. This is unthinkable. Now, did you think that this could happen? Right? And yet, just like unseating a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, an offbeat interpretation of the law changes reality. These things are death by 1,000 cuts to the rule of law, right? So again, it's a long-winded explanation to, I think journalists are trying their best, but dealing with very real fears and still continuing. Every time you do a negative story, you will be targeted. We did the frigate story, and Pia got thrown out of the palace, right?
Right.
And we weren't even the first to touch that story. So I think the way to deal with this is to keep doing our jobs. And the more of us who do it, the easier and the better it will become.
Well, Maria, time is short. Our time is about to be up. It's 6:57. Any last words, Maria, for our people and for the press and for everybody?
We're using this hashtag, Courage On. It's really important right now, and it means different things to different people. I think for us at Rappler, we know that this will require courage for us to keep doing what we do. But I would think for every Filipino right now, given the where we are, given the context of how we're living, when we come out of lockdown, if we can come out of lockdown, right? Our search for truth. It's a question all of us have to ask. And all of us are going to create what the Philippines is going to be once we leave our homes. That's in our hands. So, Mel, we need lawyers. Tell me, how are you teaching lawyers today when there are so many strange things happening?
It's harder now. Maria, it's really hard because what you see, what they see and what they read really are poles apart. Really now. It's you just have to explain them. But I always tell my student, even if the Supreme Court comes up with a final decision, their decision is not immune from critical debate. You must talk about it on and on and on until the next situation comes in and strike out that precedent. Because that's the only way democracy can survive. You just have to talk, you just have to speak. And that is precisely why I tell them, that's why the press is just there in the middle. There in the middle. The
Yes.
press is just there in the middle. You know why the press is in the Bill of Rights? Because the first institution, government, a dictatorship will crush will be the press. And there will be press freedom only as to the friendly press, but not to the critics.
Yes.
Is that correct? So thank you.
I'm with you on that.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
for having me, and I'm sorry I talked too much.
Maria Ressa, thank you very much. Bye. There you are, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very substantial night today, and we've seen how the effect of all these things has on our freedom of expression and freedom of press, and probably our future. Maria Ressa is just a woman, but she personifies a lot of things. Personifies courage, personifies the press, personifies fortitude, and personifies the will to resist persecution. Diyan na po nagtatapos ang ating programa ngayon. Hindi ko po titingnan ko lang po kung makakapag-usap pa tayo ng mga ilang mga sandali. Let me see, may mga tanong ba? Tingnan po natin ang mga tanong nyo. Just a glimpse of your questions. Sayang hindi natin natanong si Maria Ressa, but I think she's very tired already. So let me see. Messages, Messenger. Saan mo niligay? Ito ka, Andrew. Saan dito? Baba. Ito. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. It was a very substantial night. Thank you very much. Tingnan natin kung sino yung mga nagsasalita dito. Okay, let's look at some of your comments, ladies and gentlemen, sa ating interview today. Okay, super. Edgardo Basco, she said super. Great interview. Oh, si JC Punong Bayan. Andre Fajardo, very interesting. Huli question ni Ma'am Rappler, how the teaching of the lawyer right now? Very good question. That was a question for me. And clap. It's okay that we listened about her, sabi ni Helen Ang. And people are just applauding Maria Ressa. The support. Courageous, sabi ni Reginald Bailos. It's courageous. Marivic Akatsuka, she said, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or tremble in dread before them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not fail you or abandon you. God bless you and keep you, and thank you for having the courage to tell the truth, Miss Maria Ressa. Well, sometimes Actually, din, connected pa rin si Maria, hindi pa... Okay. And then let's... great job, Dean Mel. Excellent gutsy speaker. Well, that's Maria Ressa for you. Thank you. And Dean Mel and Maria Ressa, hashtag courage on. Ito yung sinabi niya, no? That was the last hashtag she said. And ito pa, mabuhay ka, Miss Maria Ressa. Wow. Amen. Sinabi naman ni Reynald by Losis. Ano? And thank you. From Sandcom, thank you, Maria Ressa. She or he? Si Sandcom. Okay. All right. Let me see. Thank you, Maria Ressa. Mabuhay ka. Keep the fight going. Wow. Thank you. Hashtag fight Maria. We will be behind you. We love our country. Si Florida Diaz Aguilar. And then, watching from Isabela, good evening. We like to listen to Maria Ressa forever. Si Helen Ang. Okay, hindi pala si Helen Ang yun, another one. Okay, ito, isa pa. Courage on, M. Ann Vaz. It was enlightening. Thank you very much. Thank you for having Maria Ressa. Ginaline de Guzman. Nelia Kalingnasan, Duterte doesn't want smart and talented women. Kaya galit kay Maria Ressa. That's the opinion of the people. You know, that's what I always tell government. You know, you cannot fault the people for having certain perceptions because what they see, what they read is opposite to what you do. So that's the point. Diba? Government must not be the exception. You must be the example. O, diba? Thank you, I love you. Christy Mercajedas. Well, talagang hahanga ka naman kay Miss Maria Ressa, no? Because imagine, you could just imagine 11 cases and more are coming. How could one really withstand that kind of institutional bombardment? Diba? Institutional bombardment na yan. And, well, you could just be amazed and say, oh my God, she's made of different stuff. Gosh, kung ako, abogado, 5-6 na kaso, nalulula na ako. Nandiyan ba si Maria? Yan, so there you are. Thank you. Good interview, Dean Mels. Okay, kaya punong bayan. Very informative. Okay, all right. How would you explain what you have said about 11 million employees? Oh, I think that was just an innocent mistake. All right. Sana naging congresswoman. Okay. Nalang si Maria Ressa. Watching from Italy, Sally Tabios. Thanks a lot po sa inyo. Very interesting topic. This topic, we should be open. Itong mga topic na ito, we should be open and we should welcome these things. Okay? Kasi mga teacher at abogado na yung alam nila batas, how they will defend their knowledge sa mga nangyayari ngayon sa government. Very powerful collaboration, si Rodely naman ang nagsabi. Courage for all Filipinos to stand for democracy, for our rights to live in a democratic country. We need to do our part. Voice out to evil. Yan ang sinasabi ni Maria Ressa kanina. Thank you, Dean Mel and Maria Ressa, galing from Malu, Ladios. Very informative. Sana po more from Maria Ressa. Well, let's just support her advocacy. Talagang, it is the right advocacy actually. That was a fantastic interview. Ami, Sam, Juan Jimenez. And let me see. So many. Watching here, attorney, good evening po. Olga MC. Great minds for us who also have enough understanding and compassion for us who are hapless. More of your kind, please, Attorney Mel and Miss Ressa. Galing kay Miraglos Takuboy Cortez. Sotico de Terra, Junior, naku, di na lang ilong ng mga trolls dudugo. Pati mga, okay, pwit, ang dudugo sa kanila. Okay, anyway, very eloquent. Ami Sam Juan Jimenez, very eloquent. You know, words are very important po eh. Kaya siguro, that's also an advice to the president. You know, words are very important. You may not mean it, but you could inspire people. And kung na-inspire yung mga mamaling tao, that's trouble. I love and admire Maria Ressa, smart and courageous one, Preciosa Herona. I have become more courageous and patriotic. God bless Maria Ressa. God bless both of you. Rolando Blanco. Thank you, Maria Ressa, for always fighting for the truth. Courage on. Courage on. On. Courage. Josephine Palma. What a brave and intelligent woman. Tony Abesamis. Ethel Canseco. Courage on. Courage on. Enrique Jesus Molina. Ayan po. And thumbs up. Thumbs up from Arnold Chan. Juan Castracion. Courage on. And there. Thank you, Attorney Mel, for your courage to speak out because some lawyers were deaf and blind by the money. Gloria Sibal Serrano Lagumbay. I pray that more of this bright discussion will continue so that more people will be enlightened in the government. And Templo Nuevo Asea. I promise you po, I'll try my best to get some other people of the know, no? Yung may mga alam, para po tayo ay malinawan sa mga issue. Pati po ako, siyempre, naghahanap ng paglilinaw kahit na po ako ay isang abogado at professor. Nida Aykayar Giyaw, thank you. Dean Mel and Maria Ressa, thank you, sabi niya. Thanks for holding this informative interview with Maria Ressa. Si Rodeline Querejon. More of Maria Ressa. Nenet Jokno Sunga. Okay, I know her from days. She was in, siguro yun ibig sabihin niya, CNN correspondent. Nelia Kaligsangan. Ma'am, thank you. You inspire us. Keep fighting. God bless you. From Grace Salga Molina. Okay, and big check, ma'am. You know the likes. Okay, all right. Let's move on. Watching from Israel. I love your program, Sir Dean Mel. It was so nice to hear Miss Ressa. Mary Van Fridan. Okay, let me see. Andain natin so much. TY, so much. Maria Ressa, great job. Abi Binaday. 11 made-up cases. Marvick Akatsutka. Very. Maria, an epitome of truthfulness, courage, and determination against this despotism or despotic leaders. Frank Briguera. Okay. Is there a way to approach the United Nations regarding this situation? Hindi natitinag si Miss Ressa dahil lahat ng kaso na binabato sa kanya ay puro kasinungalingan. May part 2 sana, Dean Mel Santa Maria. Okay po, let's try if we could again invite Maria. Let's see. Sayangin mo oras namin. Oh, sino to? Josephine Patricia Anueva Abela. What was she referring to? Well, the time was well spent, very substantial, contentful, and very courageous. Very courageous and very informative, very analytical ang nangyari kaninang 1 hour natin. Okay, all right. Maria Ressa is a woman with substance. Never give up. Eloisa Felicilda. Part 2, please, Dean Mel. Very informative and inspiring. Paulo Musaya. Wow, hit na hit si Maria Ressa. Nosebleed ang mga DDS. Ho, 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 ho. God bless, attorney. Ingat po kayo. Mga kaibigan, hindi ko na pumabasa ang lahat ng mga sinasabi nyo, pero maraming salamat po sa pagsama nyo sa amin ngayong gabing ito. At sisikapin po namin na pag-igtingin pa ang ating programa. Mag-i-interview pa po tayo. Kahit na po sa mga gobyerno, i-interviewin po natin para malaman naman ang kanilang panig. At syempre po, yung mga ordinaryong tao, pwede rin po nating interviewin para malaman natin ang kanilang mga pag-iisip at pagdaniwala. Diyan na po nagtatapos tayo ngayong gabing ito at manalangin na po tayo. Panginoon, nagpapasalamat po kami at nakatapos po kami at sana po patnubayan nyo at patnubayan nyo ang bayang Pilipinas para po makaahon sa anumang mga kasamaan at sa anumang mga problema upang maging panatag lahat kami. Lahat ng ito ay aming sinasamo sa inyo. Amen. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Ito po ang inyong lingkod, si Dean Mel Santa Maria, at tatandaan nyo po, ang kritiko ay nagmamahal rin sa ating inang bayan. Goodbye and God bless you all.